Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable life of a woman whose existence was part performance, part endurance, and entirely misunderstood by most of the Western world, the geisha. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are born in Edo, the bustling heart of Japan, full of tea shops, rice traders, wandering monks, and at least 4 people per block who think they're reincarnated warlords. You're a girl, which means your destiny is already narrowed down to 3 historically thrilling options. Marry someone dull, become a nun and live with regret, or enter the okeya, the geisha house, and spend the next 2 decades pouring tea for drunk aristocrats while pretending it's empowering. You are 6. You still think bugs are interesting, and you have no idea that your parents have made a decision. You're going to be a geisha. Not today. Today, you're being walked through the streets in your best kimono, which is itchy and far too tight. But soon, very soon, your carefree life of snacks and naps will be replaced by a rigorous education in emotional suppression. The okeya looks more like a library, married a temple, and raised a child that grew up to be emotionally distant. The woman who opens the door is Okan, the geisha house mother. She is the kind of person who can tell how much you're worth just by how you bow. You try to smile. She doesn't. Your parents bow deeply, say a few words, and leave you behind like a very polite hostage exchange. You have officially been handed over. You are not adopted. You are now property. Don't worry. You'll learn to curtsy through the trauma. You're now a shikomi. That's a fancy word for child who scrubs things. You will scrub floors, prepare baths, carry water, and occasionally cry into your sleeve. Silently, of course. Your job is to watch the geisha, never speak, and absorb everything by osmosis. You sleep in the hallway, you eat last, and you owe the house money for the rice you just spilled. The geisha themselves float past you like supernatural beings. Their hair is sculpted, their steps are silent. Their gaze says, "Don't even think about breathing too loudly. You're just a walking sponge in wooden sandals, but you're watching, you're learning, and if your knees hold out, one day you too might glide through a room without being told to fetch the towels. Your days start before sunrise and end when your back stops functioning. You sweep tatami floors, stoke charcoal fires, wash kimono fabric that costs more than your soul, and fetch things. Always fetching slippers, water, tea, more water, the good sandals, the other good sandals. By noon, you've walked more than most samurai march in a year, and heaven help you if you make noise. Shikomi must be silent. Silent like a haunted house. Speak only when spoken to, and when spoken to, respond quickly, but not too quickly, or it's disrespectful. Also, don't look directly at the senior geisha unless they're looking at you, in which case you're now looking too much. Honestly, blinking is a political act at this point. You're taught nothing formally. There's no classroom. Your entire education is observation, humiliation, and repetition. You learn how to fold an OB by watching someone do it at the speed of light. You practice bowing until your spine files a complaint. You try not to cry during your 15th failed tea pour, but somehow you start to understand how they hold the fan just so, how laughter is timed like a drum beat, how walking is a choreography of toes and timing. You realize being a geisha isn't just about beauty. It's about precision, control, and having the social reflexes of a diplomat in a landmine factory. And yet, you're still just a shikomi. You're invisible until you're useful, and then you're still kind of invisible, but now with a rag in your hand. The older girls might be kind if you're lucky, or they might treat you like a walking cautionary tale. Either way, you keep your head down and your ears open. Because here's the secret. Everyone started here. Even the most graceful, impossibly poised Geisha in the house once scrubbed this exact floor while being yelled at for drying chopsticks the wrong way. So, you endure quietly, and you wait for your chance to stop mopping and start mattering. Now that you've mastered the fine art of carrying tea and not existing, it's time to upgrade your skill set. No, not dancing or playing instruments. Don't get ahead of yourself. First, you must learn how to sit for hours without fidgeting or breathing too enthusiastically. Welcome to posture training, the ancient, highly respected Japanese tradition of turning your knees into pretzels and your spine into bamboo. You kneel in Caesar, the formal sitting position where your legs are folded neatly beneath you, your back is straight, and your circulation quietly gives up. At first, your legs go numb after 3 minutes. Then they start whispering threats. After 10, your whole lower body has legally declared mutiny. But you're not allowed to shift or stretch or scream because geisha are graceful. They do not WS. They do not wiggle. They endure pain like it's an aesthetic choice. You also begin bowing constantly. There are dozens of ways to bow, each with subtle variations. A greeting bow, a gratitude bow, an apology bow, a please don't punish me for existing bow. You learn to lower your head to precisely the right angle, hold it for precisely the right number of seconds, and rise with a smoothness normally reserved for rice paper unfolding in a breeze. Of course, you'll mess it up. Everyone does. You'll bow too fast or too shallow, or horror of horrors, touch the floor with the tips of your fingers at the wrong exact angle. Someone will scold you with the gentle intensity of a disappointed ghost. You also study how to sit during tea ceremonies. Your knees must remain folded even when your soul wants to escape your body. You must move like you are underwater, slow, fluid, deliberate. If you sneeze, congratulations. You've just dishonored your ancestors. But somewhere between the cramping and the internal screaming, something happens. You start to hold your head higher. Your movements become quieter, more deliberate. You become less child, more shadow. This is where you begin to understand. Geisha training isn't about theatrics. It's about control over your voice, over your body, over how the world sees you. You're learning how to vanish beautifully. After years of floor scrubbing, knee torture, and developing the posture of a demure statue, you finally hear the words you've been longing for. You're ready to become a Mo. It's like being told you've been promoted from ghost to ornamental human being. Congratulations. You are now a Mo, an apprentice geisha, which means, ironically, the real suffering is just beginning. First stop, the hair. Your head will now be turned into a living sculpture. Professional hairstylists arrive with lacquer, wax, pins, and a worrying sense of calm. They twist your hair into the iconic Nihongami style, a towering, complex arrangement that takes hours to create and approximately one poorly timed sneeze to destroy. And you can't sleep lying down anymore. Number you must use a takamakura, a wooden neck pillow designed to keep your head elevated so your precious hair doesn't touch anything, especially common sense. Sleeping like this is a test of willpower and neck strength. You get used to it, sort of eventually, maybe. Now comes the outfit. Your new kimono is an embroidered beast. It's gorgeous, heavy, and designed by someone who clearly hated shoulders. The sleeves are long enough to sweep a small garden. The obi sash is tied in an elaborate knot that sits halfway up your back and weighs about as much as a toddler. Getting dressed each day requires help, often from 2 or 3 other people who have memorized the ancient art of wrapping fabric around a human body until it's 75% kimono and 25% regret. Then there's the kazashi, your hair ornaments. These are beautiful, seasonal, and sharp enough to qualify as light weaponry. You wear them like a crown, but they also broadcast your rank and training stage. One wrong hairpin, and everyone in the room knows you've committed a fashion crime punishable by shame. As a maiko, your job is to watch, imitate, and occasionally serve tea while dressed like a sentient cherry blossom. You're not allowed to speak too freely, laugh too loudly, or heaven forbid, ask questions. You are art, not commentary. But despite the discomfort, the aching scalp, and the inability to sneeze near flames, you feel something else. You're not invisible anymore. People notice you. And not just because your outfit is visible from orbit. There's no single aha moment where you wake up and think, yes, I am now a proper apprentice geisha. It's more like a slow ceremonial promotion, wrapped in silk, incense, and low-grade stress. But the official day you debut as a mo, that's different. That day comes with ceremony and pressure. Think of it as the Edo period version of a debutante ball, except instead of dancing and punch, there's kneeling, sweating, and at least 2 full hours of hairstyling with hot wax. You've trained for years, bowed more than a religious statue, and memorized the complicated way to pour tea without looking like you're pouring tea. Now, finally, you get to show your face. Painted white, of course, to Kyoto's elite. And they are judging you. Elaborate kimono yet. Layers of vibrant silk that cost more than your birth family's home. It's so long it drags behind you like a very expensive regret. Your obi is tied in the Darari style, along politely, intensely, quietly, with folding fans. You wear your most trailing sash that screams, "Yes, I'm new here. Please admire my suffering." Your face is fully painted now. White rice powder from forehead to neck. Red and black accents on your eyes. Lips painted in a perfect bow, though only the bottom lip at first, because apparently rookie elegance is a half-lip kind of thing. You walk through the streets in your ubo, those platform sandals that double as medieval torture devices, while everyone turns to stare. Not because you're famous, but because you're a newly minted mo, and it's a rare sight. Also, you're walking very, very slowly. It's the only speed available. Then comes your misadashi, your formal debut ceremony. You meet clients for the first time, greet patrons, and perform for elders who remember when their necks still worked. Every step, smile, and sip of tea is a test. And failure isn't punished with yelling. It's punished with disappointment, which is worse. But somehow you survive. You make it through the ritual, the performance, the parade. You don't trip, spill anything, or offend a dignitary. This, in geisha terms, is a massive win. And just like that, you're officially a mo. Half child, half porcelain icon, full-time performance piece. Being a mo comes with many responsibilities. Pouring tea, dancing, pretending not to hear creepy innuendos. But none of them compare to your most sacred daily ritual, the face. Your makeup routine is now a full-scale military operation. Step 1. Slather your face, neck, and chest in a thick coat of white rice powder, which smells like chalk, feels like glue, and somehow finds its way into your soul. It dries faster than your will to live and sets like plaster. Once it's on, You are no longer human. You are canvas. Step 2. Eyebrows. Yours gone, covered in powder. New ones drawn on with charcoal. Thin, dark, and serious like they have a secret. Step 3. Eyes. You trace your lids with a mixture of red and black pigment, carefully applied with a brush so thin it could paint on rice grains. One twitch, and you've gone from elegant apprentice to haunted raccoon. And then the lips. As a junior Mo, you're only allowed to paint the bottom lip. Why? Tradition. Also something vague about modesty and not getting too full of yourself. You paint it red, carefully shaped like a tiny bow. It's considered beautiful. It also makes eating look like a complicated art installation. Mistakes are not tolerated. Smudge your lip. Start over. Uneven eyeliner. Unacceptable. Eyeliner doesn't even exist yet. You're using powdered minerals mixed with spit and despair. Once you're done, you look in the mirror and see something both ancient and terrifying. A doll, a glowing white, fragile, beautiful doll, with the core strength of a dancer and the daily calorie intake of a squirrel. But here's the thing. Beneath the mask, your learning power. This look commands attention. It says, I'm tradition wrapped in performance, and I will judge your clumsy chopstick technique. The makeup isn't for vanity, it's for armor. It separates you from ordinary women. It tells everyone that you're here to perform, not participate. It also tells your paws that they are no longer needed. Hope you weren't too attached to breathing through your skin. You don't wear this face for yourself. You wear it so others forget you're only 15 and start treating you like art. At first glance, you might think the geisha's greatest tools are her beauty, her kimono, or possibly the sharp metal hairpin she keeps purely for decorative purposes. But you'd be wrong. Her real weapons are twofold: the shamisen and the ancient Japanese art of making awkward men feel interesting. You learn the shamisen, a 3-stringed instrument that looks like a weaponized spatula and sounds like a melancholy banjo. Playing it requires grace, rhythm, and fingers that don't cramp like salted squid. You practice for hours daily, producing noises that begin as cat in distress and gradually evolve into respectable ambience. Your teachers are merciless. 1 missed note earns you a sigh. 2 missed notes earns you a raised eyebrow. 3 missed notes, and you're sent back to tune the instrument until it sounds less like a kitchen accident. But music is only half the equation. The other half, conversation. You're not just learning how to talk. You're learning how to talk around things, how to flatter without lying, how to suggest without promising, how to keep a man engaged in dialogue without letting him realize that you're mentally organizing tomorrow's dance routine while nodding politely. You practice subtlety like it's a martial art. If a client mentions he's rich, you smile softly and change the topic to the moon. If he tries to flirt too boldly, you compliment his taste in sandals and offer more sake. You are the queen of graceful deflection. And oh, the poetry. You memorize hundreds of poems about flowers, rivers, and heartbreak. You can quote Basho while pouring tea and still have enough bandwidth to notice who's had too much to drink, all while keeping your back straight and your voice 1 octave higher than your internal screaming. By now, you've realized that being a MO isn't about entertaining. It's about managing emotion, your own, your clients', the room's. You read moods faster than you read syllables. You know when to laugh, when to pause, and when to pretend you didn't hear something horrifying. This is your new life. Half musician, half therapist, all performance. And the scary part, you're getting really good at it. Ah, yes. The danner. The word sounds elegant, vaguely mysterious, and just polite enough to hide what it actually means. a wealthy male patron who supports your career with the strings of obligation, woven so tightly they could double as a noose. You hear about the concept early on. A Dana, they say, is a respected man who appreciates the arts, funds your training, and helps with the extravagant costs of kimono, hair ornaments, and general survival. In return, you're expected to keep him company, make him feel important, and ideally not run screaming into the night. It's not romantic. This isn't a Jane Austen novel. This is a business transaction wearing a silk robe. You don't get to choose your Danner. The house chooses. Your Ocarin weighs reputation, wealth, and social connections like a sommelier sniffing out aged insecurity. You, meanwhile, are told to smile and pretend the man in front of you, who is 40 years your senior and breathes like a tired ox, is fascinating. Now, to be clear, not every Dana expects certain favors. Some are genuine patrons of the arts who simply enjoy the company of a well-trained, clever woman who can discuss poetry and politics without crying or interrupting. Others are not. The boundaries are vague, culturally unspoken, and the pressure is immense. You owe your house. You owe your future. You owe your knees, which are currently throbbing under another 10 pounds of fabric. And so you learn the art of emotional balancing. You keep things light, friendly, respectful. You become a master of making men feel adored while keeping your soul safely sealed behind a smile. If emotional labor were taxable, you'd bankrupt the shogunate. Sometimes it works out. A Dana might sponsor you for years, shielding you from financial ruin and providing just enough distance to keep things bearable. Other times, you develop the lifelong ability to disassociate in real time while nodding at a story about grain taxes for the 15th time. Either way, the system isn't about love, it's about leverage, and the only way to survive it is to learn how to tilt the balance back in your favor, all while wearing 3 layers of braid and pretending the room isn't on fire. One day, someone hands you a pair of shoes that look like small wooden buildings and says, "Put these on." They're called okubu, towering platform sandals made of solid wood with no right to exist. Designed not for comfort, but for ceremony, elegance, and possibly revenge, these sandals are worn exclusively by Mo, which means if you're wearing them, you're now expected to float, not walk, across the streets of Kyoto without wobbling, tripping, or bursting into tears. The okobo make you taller, stouter, less human. You no longer walk like a person. You glide like a shrine procession. The goal is to move with such grace that no one notices you're actually fighting for your life with every step. They have no cushioning. Of course they don't. This is Edato, Japan. Your feet throb. Your calves scream. Your balance becomes a full-time job. God help you if it's raining. Slippery oboe on stone streets turn every trip to a tea house into an Olympic-level obstacle course. The sound they make, a sharp clop-clop, is deliberate. When a MO walks down the street, people know that rhythmic click is your new soundtrack. It's beautiful. It's traditional. It also lets everyone in a 5B block radius know where you are at all times. Subtlety overrated. Eventually your legs adjust. Sort of. You develop muscles in your ankles that you didn't know existed. You learn to fall with dignity. You perfect the art of turning corners slowly, gracefully, and with just the right amount of theatrical foot placement. And just when you think you've mastered it, someone adds a 12-pound OB to your waist and sends you to a client dinner with 3 flights of stairs. Wearing ako is a rite of passage. It's also a public reminder that you're still an apprentice. Full geisha wear flatter shoes, because by then they've earned the right to not suffer so visibly. You're still earning it. One wouldn't stomp at a time. Let's clear something up. A geisha is an entertainer. You perform. You dance, you sing, you pour sake with elegance and flirtation, so subtle it could pass for weather. You are a walking work of art, whose power lies in restraint. You say just enough. You reveal just enough. You exist in the sacred space between admiration and distance. A courtesan Orin is a high-class companion trained in the art of pleasure. Their job involves layers of performance too, but with one distinct difference. Theirs usually ends in a bedroom. Yours ends with applause, a bow, and sore feet. The visual confusion doesn't help. Both wear elaborate kimono. Both wear ornate hairstyles. But here's your cheat sheet. If the obi is tied in the front, she's a courtesan. Quick access. If it's tied in the back, she's a geisha. Slow exit. You're welcome. But none of that matters when you're in a room full of men who watched one bad movie and think geisha is code for exotic invitation. So, you develop a skill, the art of politely correcting someone while making them feel like they taught you something. It's linguistic aikido. You say things like, "Ah, how kind of you to be curious. Our traditions are quite different from that." Smile, sip, redirect, repeat. You'll give this same explanation 100 times in your career. It will never stop being necessary. But each time you do it with grace, you reassert the boundary. One smooth sentence at a time. Because being a geisha means never losing your cool, even when someone mistakes you for something you're not. Again, as a mo and eventually a geisha, you are expected to master music, dance, etiquette, and the delicate skill of looking delighted while listening to a man talk about rice tariffs for 2 hours. But your most useful and least taught skill, saying no without ever using the word no. See? You can't just reject someone outright. That would be rude and worse, ungraceful. No one pays a geisha to be blunt. Your value lies in subtlety, in suggestion, in the ability to pivot away from a proposition like a butterfly in getter sandals. Let's say a client gets bold. Maybe he leans in a little too far, compliments your eyes a little too often, or drops the classic, "Perhaps we could meet somewhere more private." You don't slap him. You don't shout. That's amateur hour. Instead, you smile, tilt your head, and say something like, "Ah, you must be very popular with women." This sentence has exactly 0 substance, but it flatters him, redirects the conversation, and buys you 10 seconds to refill his cup and pretend that never happened. Another classic. "Oh, what a shame. I'm terribly busy that day." This works even when he hasn't specified a day. You are always terribly busy because a geisha's schedule is a mystery wrapped in silk and plausible deniability. Or you deploy the old standard laughter. Just a soft, amused chuckle followed by a gentle shake of the head and a change of subject. It's a dance, one where you lead, and they never quite realize it. Over time, you become fluent in the language of deflection. You can reject someone 3 times in a row while making them feel like they're the guest of honor. It's exhausting, yes, but it's an art form. One passed down from woman to woman like a secret spell book written in fan movements and passive-aggressive grace. Because here's the truth. A geisha's job isn't to indulge desire. It's to manage it, to channel it, to make the room feel magical while keeping both hands on the wheel. And if all else fails, smile, bow, and say, "Such an interesting thought." That usually does the trick. The okeya may look serene, paper walls, soft lighting, the gentle strum of shamisen floating through the air. But don't be fooled. It's a battlefield, not one with swords or shouting. No, geisha wars are quieter, sharper, like being slowly assassinated with compliments. Every geisha house is a carefully managed ecosystem, and within it lives a secret jungle of hierarchy, rivalry, and petty vengeance served in silk. You're surrounded by women who are smart, competitive, and trained to smile through open war. Did someone borrow your obi without asking? Oh, how thoughtful. Did another mo arrive to dinner with the same seasonal hairpin? How coincidental. Did your shamisen solo suddenly get reassigned to someone else last minute? Just a misunderstanding. The kind that somehow always benefits the more popular girl. You learn quickly. Not all smiles are kind. Not all compliments are real. And never, never leave your cosmetics unattended. There's a code, of course. You don't scream or slap. That's for the untrained. Here, revenge is served with poise. One extra syllable in a haiku, one wrong step pointed out politely during practice. A subtle whisper to a client that maybe, just maybe, you heard something interesting about that other mo's behavior at the last tea ceremony. Rumors in the OK spread faster than fire on a paper lantern. You try to stay above it, of course, but eventually, you'll get pulled in. Maybe you're the new favorite. Maybe your dance was too good. Maybe someone's just in a mood and suddenly your sandals are missing. Coincidence? Surely you survive by learning to be gracious strategically. You master the art of complimenting someone while implying the opposite. Your new kimono is so bold. I could never wear something so daring. Eventually, you'll rise above it, literally. As a full geisha, you'll outrank the apprentices and get your own room, your own clients, and fewer accidental spills on your outfit. But until then, welcome to fan wars. They're silent, they're ruthless, and they're fought with grace, timing, and an occasional well-placed eyebrow raise. You don't need armor here. You need a mirror, a memory, and the ability to say thank you like it's a warning. After years of kneeling, bowing, smiling, and resisting the urge to scream into your obi, the day arrives. You are no longer a mo. You are now a geisha. The transformation is subtle. No dramatic parade, no congratulatory fireworks. You simply wake up one day, and instead of being the girl in training, you are the standard everyone else is training toward. And weirdly, your knees still hurt. Your wardrobe changes. Gone are the vividly colored high-sleeved mo kimono that made you look like a walking flower arrangement. Your new look is more subdued, more elegant, like you finally earned the right to dress like someone with opinions. Your hair, thank the gods. It's no longer a weekly sculpture made from wax and willpower. You now wear a wig. Yes, a wig. It's heavier than your head and still takes half a salon and a miracle to style. But at least you can sleep like a normal human again, which is to say poorly and on a futon. But the biggest shift, you now perform alone. You don't follow anymore. You lead. You're expected to host, entertain, and charm without assistance. Your shamisen solos are longer. Your conversations are wittier. You must be calm, poised, and above all, in control. Clients no longer see you as cute. They see you as powerful. Not in a sword-wielding, castle-burning way, but in the way that a single raised eyebrow can derail an entire conversation. You've mastered subtlety. You've weaponized grace. People listen when you speak, or rather, when you choose to speak, because geisha know the true art of power. Silence used sparingly, and with this new status comes new burdens. You must mentor the younger mo. You must smile at clients you've already smiled at 1,000 times. You must carry the weight of legacy, of expectation, of thousands of years of cultural performance. But deep down, something's different now. You're no longer pretending. You've become the person the OIA sculpted you into. Not just a woman in a kimono, but a living symbol of refinement, mystery, and perfectly calculated emotional labor. You are no longer in training. You are the tradition. So you've survived. You've danced, poured tea, smiled through centuries of tradition, and avoided tripping in Okobu long enough to reach the unspoken chapter in every geisha story. What now? Because here's the secret no one tells you. Geisha don't really retire, not in the traditional sense. There's no ceremony where someone hands you a gold fan and a thank you note. You don't get a pension. You just gradually fade from the spotlight like a candle burned all the way down. Some geisha transition into teachers. You become the one correcting someone's bow angle with a single look. You demonstrate the shamisen for the 100th time, knowing full well the mo in front of you is thinking about lunch. You've become the legacy, the living proof that grace ages well and outlives fashion. Others become house mothers. The Okasan. Yes, her. The woman who once judged your bow like it was a criminal offense. And now it's you standing by the sliding door, inspecting the new shikomi with the expression of someone wondering if the rice pot is burning. You run the house. You make the rules. And you decide who rises and who cleans the entryway again until they learn how to walk without sounding like a stampede. Some geisha marry discreetly, strategically, maybe even to a former danner who's still breathing and has the good manners not to ask what everything costs. You trade one form of performance for another, the art of smiling through domesticity, but many geisha simply continue slower, quieter, but still sharp. You host more intimate gatherings. You become less about performance and more about presence. You say less, but it means more. Your nod can shift the tone of a room. Your absence becomes noticeable. There's no grand exit, no final curtain call. You just shift into shadow, still wrapped in silk, still moving like a poem with ankles. And even when your public appearances grow rare, your name stays. Passed on by younger geisha, who still practice the gestures you perfected long ago. By now, your knees are permanently shaped like tatami mats. Your back straightens on instinct. Your voice, always melodic, holds weight. Not because it's loud, but because it rarely needs to be. You are no longer just a geisha. You are memory made visible. You won't find your name carved in stone or printed in textbooks. You won't trend. There's no viral clip of you pouring tea with surgical elegance or reciting waka poetry between shamas and chords. But your legacy isn't the kind that needs volume. It lives in the next girl, kneeling too long on aching legs, trying not to smudge her lip paint as she perfects a half smile that hides exhaustion and radiates charm. It lives in the way the fan opens, crisp, precise, and silent, a gesture older than most empires. It lives in the quiet spaces between words at a party, where your presence still shifts the atmosphere, even if no one remembers your debut date or the name of the client who bought your first seasonal comb. Your job was never to be loud. It was to be unforgettable in ways most people wouldn't know how to explain. To captivate, not seduce. To suggest, not declare. To turn a dinner into a ceremony and a glance into a statement. And through it all, you survived. You survived the training, the weight of tradition, the shoes that tried to kill you. You survived assumptions, competition, the clients who mistook performance for permission, and the rumors that never seemed to fade as fast as they were invented. But most of all, you survived elegantly in a world that demanded perfection and silence. You created space for self-possession. You carved out a life that was both performance and resistance, all while never raising your voice. And maybe no one will say your name out loud when they tell the story of Kyoto, but someone will sip tea, just so. Someone will walk in kimono without rustling. Someone will smile with an unreadable gaze and say just enough and not a word more. and in that moment, you'll still be there. Not as a ghost, but as legacy. Forget candle-lit dinners or moonlit serenades. In ancient Sumer, the birthplace of civilization, marriage was less about romance and more about record-keeping. Love was optional. Contracts were not. Sumerians, who lived over 4,000 years ago in what is now southern Iraq, were the first people we know of to formalize marriage with written agreements. And by written, we mean pressed into wet clay using a stylus. These were not declarations of eternal affection. They were binding economic transactions. The uniform tablet often spelled out exactly what each party was bringing into the union. And no, unconditional love was never one of the listed assets. The bride came with a doughy, livestock, textiles, servants, or land. The groom's family might toss in a bride price, which was less a gesture of goodwill and more of a deposit. If the marriage failed, the tablet made it clear what was forfeited, refunded, or repossessed. Yes, Sumerian marriages came with early versions of prenups. Your love life could be audited. But the Sumerians didn't stop at cold transactions. Marriage was a cornerstone of maintaining social order. Women were expected to be loyal and fertile. Men were expected to provide and protect, or at least not embarrass the family at public rituals. Infidelity, especially by the wife, could be punished harshly, including death by drowning. Divorce allowed, but only if you could prove just cause. We grew apart wouldn't cut it. Weddings themselves were modest affairs. No Instagram-worthy decor or white veils. The couple would move in together and perform rituals, possibly invoking deities like Inanna or Enlil. But the real marriage began when the community recognized the union and the contract was filed like an ancient tax return. The Sumerians viewed marriage less as a personal journey and more as a civil duty. Your union was a cog in the machinery of inheritance, agriculture, and divine order. Your spouse, a partner in social strategy, a teammate in a world where surviving floods and feeding goats took precedence over candle-lit poetry. In ancient Egypt, marriage wasn't just sanctioned by society, it was mirrored in the heavens. The gods themselves were married. Isis and Osiris, Nut and Gb. Even chaos had a soulmate. Egyptians believed that divine pairs maintained cosmic balance, and human marriages were expected to do the same. That's a lot of pressure for a couple trying to keep the household cats from eating the sacred grain. Marriage was seen as the ideal social state. A man was expected to marry young, ideally before he could do too much damage as a bachelor. Women married in their early teens, and while love may not have been the focus, companionship and affection were valued. Egyptian love poetry was surprisingly tender. One poem reads, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of you." Another says, "She has stolen my heart with her hair." Not exactly Tinder, bios, but it's something. Legal documents were often involved, especially among the upper class. Like the Sumerians, the Egyptians used contracts with clear stipulations about property, dowries, and divorce terms. But unlike Sumer, Egyptian women had notable legal rights. They could own property, initiate divorce, and sue their husbands for neglect. Queen or not, an Egyptian woman could drag her husband to court if he failed to provide bread, beer, or crucially, oil. Incestuous marriage was another curiosity, especially among royals. Pharaohs routinely married their sisters. And no, it wasn't because of a limited dating pool. The reason to emulate the gods. Just as Isis married her brother Osiris, a royal union between siblings was believed to preserve divine bloodlines, sacred genes, along with a side of genetic risk. Wedding ceremonies themselves weren't elaborate. There was no priestly blessing or public spectacle. A couple was considered married once they moved in together and cohabited. That's it. No doves, no cake, and certainly no throwing of bouquets. The gods didn't need fanfare to approve. Children were the central goal of marriage. Not love, not partnership, not personal fulfillment, just heirs. The more the better. If your wife couldn't conceive, you might take a concubine or marry a second woman. Love optional. Lineage essential. In most ancient cultures, marriage was a family affair. In Sparta, it was a military operation. If Sumerian marriage was a business deal and Egyptian marriage a divine mimicry, then Spartan marriage was a survival tactic wrapped in state propaganda and six-pack abs. Here's how it worked. Spartan boys were taken from their families at age 7 and tossed into the Aoga, the brutal training system designed to produce elite warriors who could kill with a spoon and eat raw roots without flinching. Girls, meanwhile, were trained too in wrestling, javelin throwing, and sarcastic onliners. The idea wasn't just strength for strength's sake. It was about producing healthy offspring. A weak child was a liability. A strong child was a future Spartan. So marriage wasn't about candlelight or meeting the one. It was state-mandated breeding. The state even scheduled the ideal marriage age around 30 for men, early teens for women. Romantic? No. The wedding ceremony was as strange as you'd expect from people who thought iron bars made good currency. Here's how it went. The bride's head was shaved and she was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals. Then she was left alone in a dark room. The groom would sneak in at night, consummate the marriage, and then sneak back out before sunrise, returning to his all-male barracks. Yes, even after marriage, Spartan men didn't live with their wives. The relationship was built on secrecy and quick visits like ancient Tinder with a curfew. Why all the cloak and dagger? The idea was to keep desire alive. Too much familiarity might make men soft, and softness had no place in Sparta. The mystery kept the spark going, or so the logic went, though modern therapists might have questions. Despite the odd rituals, Spartan women had more power than most ancient counterparts. They could own land, run estates, and insult men in public without being executed. Love poems weren't popular, but wit was. Spartan women were famously sharp-tongued. One told her husband, "Come back with your shield or on it." That's basically the ancient Greek version of "don't embarrass me." In ancient India, marriage was more than a personal union. It was a sacred duty, a spiritual journey governed by dharma, the cosmic law. Rooted in the Vedic tradition, marriage was considered one of the key rites of passage, the samskara, necessary for fulfilling one's responsibilities to family, ancestors, and society. Marriage was not entered into lightly. It wasn't merely a contract between two individuals, but a bond between two families, two lineages, and sometimes two entire villages. It was meant to uphold Varna Dharma, the social and moral order, ensuring stability through caste alignment, ritual propriety, and mutual obligation. Arranged marriages were the norm, and horoscopes played a central role in matching partners. Astrologers examined the alignment of stars and planets to determine compatibility. The idea was that cosmic harmony would lead to earthly peace. A good match was believed to bring prosperity, not just to the couple, but to the entire household. The wedding ceremony was a complex symbolic ritual centered around Agi, the sacred fire. The couple would walk 7 steps, the sapardi around the fire, taking vows at each step to nourish one another, to grow in strength, to share in wealth, to be righteous, to raise strong children, to enjoy the seasons of life together, and to remain lifelong companions. With these steps, the two were considered spiritually united. The wife, known as Shrid Dharma Patni, was expected to be both a partner and a moral guide. She managed the household, performed religious duties, and was central to preserving the family's ritual purity. Her role, though domestic, was seen as spiritually vital. The husband was expected to protect, provide, and uphold dharma through his own conduct. Polygamy existed especially among the elite, but monogamy was considered ideal. Widows were expected to lead a life of austerity, although practices varied over time and region. The controversial custom of sati, where a widow self-immolated on her husband's pee, was rare in ancient times and emerged much later largely outside Vedic ideals. In ancient China, marriage was not a private affair. It was a deeply structured institution rooted in Confucian principles, ancestral worship, and family hierarchy. To marry was not simply to fall in love or to raise a family. It was to honor the past and secure the future under the ever-watchful eyes of both the living and the dead. The primary purpose of marriage was continuity of the family line, filial piety. Xiao demanded that a son marry and produce male heirs to maintain ancestral rights. If a man failed to do so, he not only disappointed his parents, but risked disrupting the family's spiritual duties. Ancestors had to be fed and honored. A childless home was a broken chain in the lineage, a cause for shame and cosmic imbalance. Marriage decisions were never made by the young couple. Families employed matchmakers who negotiated the terms, inspected backgrounds, and consulted astrological charts. A marriage without proper celestial alignment was considered risky. Compatibility wasn't about chemistry, but about heavenly timing and earthly duty. The 6 rites of traditional Chinese marriage reflected this ceremonial complexity. It began with a proposal, then name exchange, divination, betrothal gifts, setting the date, and finally the ceremony itself. Each step involved rituals, symbolism, and precise communication between families, a process that could take months, even years. On the wedding day, the bride wore red, the color of joy and luck, and traveled in a decorated sedan chair to the groom's house. She was veiled, silent, and ceremonially passive. Upon arrival, the couple bowed 3 times, to heaven and earth, to the parents, and finally to each other. These bows signified the order of loyalty. Cosmos first, then family, then self. Once married, the wife entered her husband's household and was expected to obey his parents as her own. Her duty was to bear sons, manage domestic affairs, and serve quietly. While some women gained respect with age or motherhood, their position remained within a clearly defined patriarchal framework. Divorce was rare and shameful. A man could dismiss his wife for disobedience or infertility, but a woman had no such right. The marriage bond, though revered, was unbalanced in power. In ancient Japan, marriage was shaped not by centralized law or religious doctrine, but by centuries of evolving customs, regional traditions, and a profound reverence for nature and ancestors. Rooted in Shinto beliefs, the indigenous spirituality of Japan, marriage was less about formal contracts and more about purity, harmony, and social cohesion. Shintoism teaches that kami, divine spirits, inhabit all things, rivers, trees, mountains, and even people. A harmonious marriage, therefore, was seen as aligning oneself with the natural order. Purity and ritual cleanliness were essential in every major rite of passage, and marriage was no exception. In early periods, marriages were arranged by families, not romantic partners. The goals were practical alliance building, land consolidation, and continuation of the household line, especially in elite families. However, Compared to neighboring cultures, Japan afforded women a relatively higher status. In ancient times, women could inherit property, manage estates, and wield influence within the household. The typical marriage followed a process known as mukoiri, or groom entering the bride's household. In this custom, the groom moved into the bride's family home, a reversal of the more common patrial traditions elsewhere in Asia. This reflected the importance of matrilineal continuity in some regions, especially among powerful families. Over time, however, this gave way to yumeiri, where the bride joined the groom's household, a shift that aligned with growing patriarchal norms. Shinto wedding rituals focused on purification and reverence. The couple would participate in a sansan kudo ceremony, drinking sake in 3 sips from 3 cups. Each sip represented a bond between the individuals, between their families, and between their spirits. There were no vows in the Western sense, but the symbolism spoke of unity and mutual respect. Unlike rigid legal systems in other cultures, early Japanese marriage customs were flexible. Polygamy was practiced among elites, but not institutionalized. Divorce, while frowned upon, was possible, especially in cases of infertility or incompatibility. However, public harmony and family honor were always prioritized. The act of separating had to be handled with discretion. In ancient Rome, marriage was not simply a personal milestone. It was a civic institution intertwined with law, class, and public duty. Romans treated marriage as a reflection of the social order, where alliances were forged, property was transferred, and lineage was preserved under the watchful gaze of the state and the patilius. The male head of the household marriage in Rome was categorized into different legal forms. The most traditional was cum manu, where the wife left her family and came under the legal authority or manes of her husband or his father. She was no longer legally part of her natal family and became akin to a daughter in her husband's household. Her property became his. This form, however, gradually faded in favor of sine manu, in which the wife remained under the authority of her father and retained greater legal independence. This shift reflected evolving attitudes and the increasing economic power of elite Roman women. Marriage ceremonies were marked by ritual and symbolism. The bride wore a flame-colored veil called the flamium, and her hair was parted into 6 locks with a spear, a nod to tradition and the martial roots of Roman culture. The joining of hands dextrarum untio symbolized the union, and offerings were made to household gods, especially Juno, the goddess of marriage. A formal procession led the bride to her new home, where she was welcomed with fire and water, emblems of purity and life. For Roman elites, marriage was a political tool. Senators and nobles used marriages to cement alliances and secure influence. Personal affection, while not irrelevant, was often secondary. Even emperors arranged marriages for political leverage, frequently disregarding their own preferences. Women in Roman marriages were expected to be modest, loyal, and dedicated to running the household. However, Roman women, especially under sine manu marriages, could own property, inherit wealth, and even initiate divorce. Divorce was common and socially acceptable, provided it was handled with dignity. "Where you are, gas, I am Gia," the bride would once vow. But if things soured, parting ways was often as swift as declaring intent before witnesses. For the ancient Hebrews, marriage was not just a social contract. It was a sacred covenant guided by divine law. Rooted in the traditions of the Hebrew Bible, marriage was a cornerstone of religious life, lineage, and moral order. It was a relationship that reflected not only human connection, but also the enduring bond between the people of Israel and their God. Marriage was viewed as essential to fulfilling the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. It was expected of all men, and early marriage was the norm. Love, while valued, was not the foundation. Obedience to God and duty to family took precedence. A proper marriage preserved tribal identity, secured inheritance rights, and maintained the purity of the community. Arranged marriages were standard, negotiated between families with a focus on kinship ties, reputation, and property. A bride price, the mohar, was paid by the groom to the bride's family, not as a purchase, but as a formal gesture of commitment and compensation. Women often married in their early teens, while men were slightly older, having established the means to support a household. Ceremonies were domestic affairs, often taking place in the bride's home and followed by a celebratory feast. The rituals emphasized joy, continuity, and blessings with wine, singing, and the reading of sacred texts. A written Cuba, marriage contract, outlined the husband's responsibilities to provide food, clothing, and conjugal rights. It also protected the wife's financial interests in case of divorce or widowhood. Though patriarchy defined much of Hebrew society, women held an honored position within the family structure. The woman of valor, described in Proverbs, was wise, industrious, and respected. While polygamy existed, especially among early patriarchs like Abraham and Jacob, monogamy became more common over time, particularly after the Babylonian exile. Divorce was permitted, but discouraged. A man could issue a get-rid of divorce under certain conditions. However, this process required religious approval and was subject to legal limitations, ensuring that the woman was not left vulnerable or dishonored. Among the ancient Celts, marriage was a deeply communal and symbolic act woven into the rhythms of the natural world, tribal allegiance, and ancestral law. It was less a static institution and more a fluid, adaptable bond shaped by personal choice, social duty, and seasonal rituals. Unlike the rigid legal codes of Rome or the cosmic obligations of India, Celtic marriage customs varied widely across tribes and regions, from Ireland to Gaul to the Scottish Highlands. Yet some common threads endured: partnership, fertility, and honor. The Celts viewed marriage as a sacred oath, often sworn in the presence of tribal elders, druids, and the ever-present gods of land and sky. Marriage could be monogamous or polygynous, depending on wealth and status. Among nobles and chieftains, it was not uncommon for a man to have multiple wives, each with her own household standing. However, this was governed by clear expectations and mutual agreement. Women were not passive figures. Celtic women often had legal rights, including property ownership, divorce, and even the ability to initiate marriage. One striking feature of Celtic union was the trial marriage, a year-and-a-day arrangement where couples could live together before deciding whether to continue the relationship permanently. If either partner was dissatisfied, they could walk away without stigma. This custom, far ahead of its time, emphasized consent and compatibility over permanence for its own sake. Ceremonies often coincided with seasonal festivals like Beltane, a fire rite marking the beginning of summer and fertility. Couples would leap over flames or pass between bonfires to symbolize purification and union. These rites were believed to bless the marriage with strength, fruitfulness, and harmony with nature. Marriage contracts, especially among elites, were formalized and could include clauses about dowries, shared property, and inheritance. Unlike many ancient societies, Celtic law recognized mutual responsibilities between spouses. Abuse or neglect could be grounds for dissolution, and women had recourse in tribal courts. The spiritual dimension of Celtic marriage was ever present. Vows were not just personal. They were bound to the earth, the tribe, and the gods. The couple's union was a thread in the larger tapestry of land and lineage, and their fidelity was a promise not only to each other, but to the sacred balance that held the world together. The origins of Malbuck Castle lie not in the misty forests of Poland, but in the searing heat of the Holy Land. During the late 12th century, the Teutonic Order was born amidst the chaos of the Third Crusade. Originally formed in 1190 as a group of German crusaders caring for wounded Christian soldiers in Accra, the order soon transformed into a full-fledged military monastic force. Part nurse, part knight, and wholly devoted to the expansion of Christendom. But the Holy Land was slipping away. As Muslim armies under Saladin reclaimed territory and European powers lost interest, the Teutonic Knights found themselves without a clear purpose. Their zeal remained, but the battleground would shift. In 1226, the Polish Duke Conrad of Movia saw an opportunity. Plagued by raids from pagan Prussian tribes to the north, he invited the knights into his lands, offering them territory in exchange for protection and conversion of the Baltic peoples. The Teutonic Knights agreed, but they had ambitions far beyond missionary work. With papal backing and imperial approval, they began carving out their own theocratic state. In this war-torn frontier, the sword would spread the cross. Brick by brick, they laid the foundation of a new stronghold to anchor their rule, Marienburg, later known as Malborg. Mary's Castle, named in honor of the Virgin Mary, patroness of the order. Construction began in 1274, and from the start, it was meant to all. This was not merely a fortress, it was a declaration. Built in the distinctive red Gothic brick style of Northern Europe, it rose from the banks of the Nogat River like a crusader's dream cast in stone. Its walls would not only keep out pagans and rebels, they would proclaim the spiritual and military might of the knights to the entire region. Malbork was more than a castle. It was a base of operations, a monastery, an administrative center, and a symbolic heart of a rising religious empire. The warrior monks were no longer foreign guests. They were rulers now, and this castle, still in its infancy, would one day become the largest fortress in the world by land area and a bastion of medieval power that still endures. By the late 13th century, Malbork Castle was no longer just a strategic foothold. It was evolving into a monumental expression of power, faith, and architectural ambition. Rising from the flatlands of the Vistula Delta, it stood defiant and unmistakable. A fortress built not of stone, but of brick, the bold material of the north. In an age where most castles clung to limestone and granite, Malbork's red Gothic walls radiated both innovation and intimidation. The Teutonic Knights didn't simply want a stronghold, they wanted a sacred fortress where war and worship could exist side by side. The layout reflected this duality. The complex was built in 3 sections: the high castle, the middle castle, and the lower castle, each walled and fortified, each serving distinct purposes. The high castle, the spiritual core, housed the chapel, the chapter house, and the monks' quarters. This was